So when we kicked off the Level Up Fishing podcast, we started with tube jig heads and we covered a lot of information about them. Some of it completely shocked me that I didn't even know. But we covered jig head weight selection, we covered line ties 60 versus 90s, we covered hooks and hook sets. I mean, we've covered a lot of information. But we left out probably one of the most important topics when it comes to a tube jig head, and that's rigging.
So, welcome to the Level Up podcast. This is Andy Cochran.
And I am Stormy Cochran, and we are the proud owners of GSO Fishing here in Colorado.
So, we want to put a tidy little bow on our tube jig fishing talks that we've done. And as Stormy said, what we need to also cover with all this stuff is how to rig them.
Let's start with this. The question we get asked all the time is, are you guys going to make tubes?
Yeah, we make our own line of soft plastic lures as well. And if you look at the ones we make, similar to our jig heads, they fill a hole in the market that's not there by, at least in our mind, what we feel like in a trout market especially is missing.
Yeah.
Our mud bugs, our swim baits, our fin candies, our grubs, all very specifically designed soft plastics that there's versions that exist, but they're not exactly one like the shape or the color designs that we want for a trout market. So that's why we did that. But when you talk about tube jigs, like the soft plastic tube, that is not a market that we want to touch because there are a lot of fantastic tube jig makers on the market right now, and several new ones that are coming up and coming. And that's not something that we feel like we need to mess with because there's a lot of people that have really perfected it, and we've been able to, over the years, use all their stuff on our guide service and fun fishing or whatever. And we certainly have our favorites. And so that's out of respect for friends in the industry, that is not a category that we're going to enter.
Yeah. But we do want to make it easier for our customers. And so we actually have reached out to several of the people we know in the industry, and we are going to start carrying their tubes on our website so anglers can just check out and get the tubes you need with the tube jig heads that we feel pair really well together.
Yeah, we do want to make it like a simple one-stop shop for all your premium fishing needs. So we're going to partner with several of these guys to get you in touch with their products as well as ours. It just makes it a lot easier for everybody to get exactly what they need to have the best experience on the water. So with that said, I think it's worth your time looking into some of these manufacturers on your own. And like I say, we'll be carrying some of them on our website as well. So probably like in December, start looking for that through us as well. But in the meantime, we'll just tell you about them. There's a couple of Colorado companies out there. The first one is Carl's Custom Plastics. He's out of the Front Range of Colorado, and he's got a very unique design that he's a couple of years into prototyping and developing. And, you know, through the help of a lot of serious lake trout and bass guys, has been able to really dial in his own like super custom tube jig body, which is fantastic. Yes. So that's one we're really looking forward to supporting. There's also a guy over here on the western slope of Colorado named Chase Nicholson that you'll find him on Instagram, and when he builds his own custom tubes, that's where he'll sell them.
And he has color matched exactly what you need to dial in your lake trout game on Blue Mesa. He is an outstanding lake trout fisherman.
So don't take our word for it. Go to his Instagram page and you will see for yourself.
Yeah.
He uses our heads, thank you Chase, but he also builds a very specific tube jig for what he feels like is especially the game on Blue Mesa, and he catches a heck of a lot of fish with those things. So Hopefully that's another one that we'll have available for you through us as well. But in the meantime, hit up Chase for some custom tubes. Outside of that, a really good friend of ours and his family, there's a couple different companies that we've been using tubes of theirs for a long time, and that's Freshwater Basics and Radical Glow. We kind of model some of our glow stuff after what Radical Glow pioneered years and years ago, which is an actual true to color glow powder that they use in their plastics that we've adapted and used in our jig heads. So those of us that really feel like the true color of the lure matters, when it's glowing in very dark conditions, it should probably also glow the color that it actually is, whether it's blue or green or pink or purple or white. If it looks like that in the daylight, it actually looks like that when it glows too. So Radical Glow's been around for a long time. They kind of pioneered that. I think what's generically called super glow powder that actually glows its own actual color, which is like you kind of take that for granted, but that's not necessarily how it works.
Yeah.
Most things that have a glow sticker on them in the fishing industry, when you charge them up and put them in the dark, they actually glow kind of like green color. That's kind of the standard deal. And then outside of that, there's a relatively new company out in Utah called Send It Outdoors, and those guys have also come up with a very well thought out and very tested tube jig body that we are really looking forward to supporting as well going into this ice season. Theirs is probably the most durable tube body we've ever been around. Like I say, it's really well thought out. And then the other kind of new guys out there, their Instagram and Facebook, I think Instagram is really where they sell, and it's called ASM, or Angler State of Mind. So check out their Instagram page as well. And that guy's got some really cool custom, especially custom painted tubes that really match the hatch, so to speak, in a lot of different sizes for a lot of different applications. So those are kind of the big hitters that we're really looking forward to supporting kind of through our website with our jig heads. And really a lot of these tubes are what we modeled our jig heads to fit and to match, because we feel like those are the more premium tubes on the market that we want to support and we see a lot of success with on the water.
And they have outstanding owners. Like, one of the big things about our company is that whether it be our jigs, our guide service, whatever it is, it's not a competition. And so sitting there and meeting these owners, they have that same perspective of, it's like, let's support each other. Let's see how we can help each other out. Let's do our best for our customers, and how can we make it better for them? And we just love these companies that have that perspective of, like, it's not about me, it's about all of us working together.
Yeah, we're all small town, local, kind of building our own brands, and we all have been really supportive in the industry for a long time. So, yeah, join us and help and support these guys and get them going. And outside of those kind of more custom companies, there's a lot of big hitters on the market that have been around for a long time. Like, Yum makes tubes, and Strike King makes tubes, and Berkeley, and the big names. And we've been using everybody's tubes forever.
Yeah.
And companies like Dynamic, which is also a Colorado company, Canyon Plastic, Dry Creek Outfitters out of Idaho, those guys make some really unique stuff too. So there's a ton of different options on the market. So again, that's why we're not going to go
We're
there.
not going there. We are not. We have so many friends in the industry, and we are so happy to work with them and pair our heads with their awesome tubes.
So with that said, we need to talk about how to rig these things.
Yeah.
So like we started out, we're talking about the tube jig heads that we make are designed for the head to go inside the hollow part of a tube jig body, and then you simply poke the line tie through the plastic and tie it on. Mm-hmm. And that's, I guess, what we would call an open hook jig head type rigging. So a couple of things with that. You'll hear us talk about scent with a lot of the different types of fishing that we get into for, a lot of different species and applications. But when we fish with tube jigs, we use scent most of the time. And there's several different ones that work. There's oils, there's like smelly jelly type paste kind of stuff. There's sticky liquid, there's gels, there's like sticks that look like armpit sticks.
Chapstick.
There's a lot of different stuff on the market for that. But when you start rigging these tubes, one thing that you will find is that regardless of what type you use, we really like to use any kind of scent with tube jigs because it makes rigging the jig head a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the hollow part of a tube and the head that you want to use with it, like the fit is really, really tight. And so when you start to slide the lead head up inside the plastic body, there's a lot of friction there, and a lot of times that like the plastic that the tube bodies are made of is real kind of sticky almost, and it like sticks to the jig head and it's hard to push it in without ripping it. Or it actually like creates an airlock.
Yeah.
Like you end up sucking all the air out of the front end of it and you like can't physically push it in there. So those are just simple. You'll see that when you start rigging these. Depending on what you're trying to imitate with your tube lure, just use that kind of a scent, whether it's crawfish or, if it's like a fish looking one, there's a lot of Procure stuff like trophy trout or predator, or these ones that kind of mimic more like a bait fish. Or you could just go like the other end with something that really attracts, like garlic, anise, or something like that. There's a lot of different stuff you can use and play with. But at the end of the day, it's going to make rigging that jig head inside of the tube body a whole lot easier.
And with the scent, as you jig that and you say you put a paste on the front of the tube to help slide it in and make it easier to rig, as you sit there and jig that in the water, it's going to release scent as you move it up and down, hit it on the bottom. It's going to release scent that whole time slowly and attract hopefully more fish.
So that's a great point too. Like that thing's gonna, rather than rigging it all up, tying it on, and then putting some scent on the outside on the plastic body, which that stuff, that works that way too. But with it being inside the tube, I think it's a little more subtle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for especially lake trout, you can certainly overdo it. And so having more of a subtle release of scent, like it's not going to infect the whole water column around your jig. It's just going to be real specific to the back end of your tube. I think that, especially for lake trout, that seems to be pretty important. So that kind of goes over, it is pretty basic rigging the tube. One last thing to talk about there. A lot of times when we're vertical jigging or wanting a very horizontal presentation with our tube body, one thing to note here is that you don't always have to put the tube jig head all the way to the head very front of the tube. Like you can literally put it halfway and poke the line tie out. So you could use even a jig head that looks too short for the tube body that you have, and just don't put it all the way to the front. Like there's not a rule about that.
Yep.
So if you're trying to get your plastic tube body to balance horizontal in the water, you can usually achieve that with almost any 90-degree line tie jig head simply by where you poke the line tie out of the top of the jig. So play around with where the actual weight sits inside the body of the tube, and that'll help you get that, perfect horizontal look.
Now, there are other types of rigs that you can use with a tube. What are they?
Yeah, as we began this whole tube jig talk, we emphasized that a tube is one of the most versatile lures ever made. And it and its variations have been around for a long, long time for a good reason. They're a very good fish catching lure. So besides the open hook rigging style, which is in our wheelhouse, there's a lot of other really good ways to rig a tube and to use it. You'll see it in the bass world a lot. And it's, the typical Texas rig where the tube's a pretty bulky bait. So what we usually use there is what's called a wide gap worm hook for that kind of rig. So it gives a little more hook gap with that bulky lure. But a Texas rig with a tube, so then we'll use an inline weight in front of the tube. A lot of times you can peg it or not peg it, and you can look into how to do all that. But, a Texas rig with a tube is really versatile. It's really good, like flipping heavy cover, especially wood. A tube body is very minimal. It doesn't have like appendages that flap around and get hung in branches and stuff like that. It's a really streamlined lure that slides through cover really easy. It's really natural looking. The colors of it that are on the market, you can match anything. And then, we can also throw a tube like on a, in open water, but Texas rigged, because with the weight out in the front of it like that, it'll just present it in a different way than an internal jig head would. Typically, like that usually doesn't work very well for trout because they have small mouths and like the anatomy, and they like to nip at stuff and bite its tail. And so sometimes having the hook point buried in the plastic like you would on a typical Texas rig to make it weedless isn't really the best hookup ratio rigging to use a tube with for trout, but a lot of other fish it works really, really well. There's another, I can't remember the name of the company, but you can just Google it. It's called the Stupid Tube. And this thing hit the bass world by storm a few years ago, and these guys made a jig head similar to ours, but they're using a wide gap style hook on it. And so this is an internally weighted weedless way to rig a tube called the Stupid Tube. And so that's worth looking into too, because again, it presents the tube in a different way than a Texas rig would, but also allows for a weedless rigging, so you can throw it in like heavy cover. And then outside of that, there's a few companies that make, you see crappie tubes, like tiny little tubes, and those style tubes work really good on an open jig head, or equally as well on like a drop shot. You can also use it like on a shaky head, Ned rig head. There's so many different ways. Basically, a tube is like one of the a straight Ned worm is probably as minimal as it gets as lures go, and the tube is like the next step up. So it's like the most natural finesse style approach that you can have, and there literally are tons of different ways to rig them.
We even like on our pill heads, and we also have a head prototype that's even smaller. I call it the plug. I don't know why. It just reminds me of like a cork in a wine bottle. But anyways, we have this prototype head that we have been using for actually several years in the spring in the river, and we use little micro tubes as the trailer on them. That these tubes are half an inch long, and we use it as the trailer to the jig head, and they work great. So really thinking outside the box and rigging these things maybe how they weren't originally designed, they work fantastic in several other applications.
So hopefully these rigging things that we've talked about will kind of wrap this up for you guys and give you a couple more ideas on different ways that you can rig a tube, or really the tried and true open hook method that we use pretty much year round on our lake. Don't forget your scent. It actually helps rig the tube itself. Plus, if you're using the right scent, it helps you catch more fish too at the same time.
Yeah.
And then, the placement of the lead inside the tube body to get the presentation that you're looking for. Just a couple of things to think about if we haven't given you enough to think about with tube jigs.
And I mean, all those companies that we talked about before, we can't say enough good things about these companies. Check them out. Hopefully, we'll have them on the website here soon. And until then, you can order them direct. Freshwater Basics, Radical Glow, Chase Nicholson, look him up on Instagram, Carl's Custom, Tube Jigs, Send It Outdoors, Angler State of Mind is a new one. And there's several other great products on the market that you guys can look into too. But these are some of the ones that we personally use. We use them on our guide boats. We know the owners, they're outstanding individuals, and we can't recommend them enough.
So until next time, your homework is to get some tube jigs and learn how to rig them and learn how to fish them, because that should be a lure in every fisherman's arsenal, regardless of where you live or what you fish for. A tube jig needs to be part of your game.
Yep, it is standard. It should come with every fishing pole.
Yep.
And just to recap, we have talked about tube jigs ad nauseum, I think, at this point. And it's amazing to think that something as simple as a tube jig, there can be so much to it, but there is. Andy went into detail about casting them from the shoreline versus a boat and what he would do so they don't get hung up on rocks and things like that. He really gave us a lot to think about in the previous episodes. So if you haven't listened to him, there is so much good information in there and how to make them work with you and not against you. So if you haven't listened to them yet, go back. You can find them on Facebook. You can find them on the blog section of our website, and you can find them and follow us on YouTube.
Yeah, click that subscribe button.
So thank you for listening to another episode of the Level Up Fishing Podcast.
And we will see you on the water.